Hi, everybody. My name's Tami, and I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Tami. But I'm going to move this. Hold on. I got to dress my drink in the right place, right? Uh, anyway, I'm grateful to be here this evening. Heck, I'm grateful to be anywhere this evening sober, that's for sure, because it wasn't always the case. I certainly want to thank the members of the committee for asking Patrick and I to come out and share this weekend. I had a lot of calls. There was a lot of follow through. The people that, we have an opportunity to do this quite often throughout the United States, and some committees are more on top of their game than others, and I'm here to report that the Denali committee is on top of their game, and you have a really good reputation at this conference. I just casually posted on Facebook. I never posted I'm speaking, but I just posted that I landed in Anchorage. That's all I posted, and I must have had like 50 of my friends in the program say, "Are you going to the Denali conference? That's the best, blah, blah." And of course, we don't get on that in Facebook, so I didn't respond, but you have a very good reputation up here for this conference, so it's an honor and a privilege to be here. I really want to thank my husband, Patrick, for joining me. Patrick has 34 years of sobriety in his own right, and I have 22 years, so we have 56 years of drinks undrunk in our home, and that makes for a pretty peaceful existence these days. And when he speaks, I go with him, and when I speak, he comes with me, and you'll hear later in my story, I didn't drink away a 21-year marriage. I actually sobered away a 21-year marriage, because the same selfishness and self-centeredness that I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous with on April 24th, 1993, I brought well into my sobriety. And the same husband that I abandoned in drunkenness, I went on, unfortunately, to abandon in sobriety. In the beginning, it was always me and my drinking, me and the police, me in jail, me in the courts. And when I became sober, I brought that same selfishness, me and my sobriety, me and my program, me and working with newcomers, me going back to school, me. And I abandoned that husband in drunkenness. But through the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was able to inventory that divorce, because the inventory is ours, it is not theirs. And it doesn't say in the book what is our part in it. I hear that a lot from the podium. It says, where were we at fault? Where were we to blame? And so I had to look at that 21 marriage. And yes, I did get sober, and I did a lot of things to make things right. But unfortunately, I remained selfish and self-centered. And the sad thing is that husband had become the #1 guy in my life. And I really learned how to love my husband in sobriety. But unfortunately, what I had in my heart never quite translated, because I was just always so darn busy. And through that inventory process, I don't make that same mistake with my current husband, Patrick. And I always make sure that he knows he's #1 and we do this deal together. And that's been one of the blessings of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous, is if you don't like your script at any time in your life, whether you're coming in here as a newcomer and you're tore up from the floor up, or you're sitting here with time and sobriety and you don't like the way things are going in your life, we have 12 steps that help us to rewrite our script. And there's a way up and there's a way out. And what a great thing that is. I just want to find something here, that book. Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to get right into my story. There seems to be a whole slew of speakers lately as we travel that have become these, comic acts and these stand-up comedians. And they've got their audiences rolling on the floor and they're laughing their heads off. And I'm here to tell you that if you're here tonight for me to entertain you and to have you rolling on the floor, you got yourself the wrong speaker. Because my sponsor, Clancy, my home group is the Pacific Group out in Los Angeles, and we are the largest weekly meeting in the world. We run about 800 to 1,000 people a week. We have 80 people just on our coffee crew alone. Our women wear dresses, our men wear suits and ties. We all have commitments, and we're a fine oiled machine. And I have a sponsor named Clancy. I'm sure those of you that have been around have heard of him. And Clancy, I believe, is the best walking example that I've seen in the 22 years that I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous, because his primary purpose, not his secondary, not his tertiary, not after his family and his job and everything else, his primary purpose in life is, first, he stayed sober himself for 57 years, and he dedicated 57 years of that sobriety to helping other alcoholics. My sponsor is 88 years old. He still travels every weekend speaking. I've gone on a few of those occasions with him, and he sleeps in airports and he sleeps in fetal positions in all kinds of places, but he's at that podium carrying the message. And he still works a full-time job at 88 years old. He's at that midnight mission that he runs at 9 o'clock every morning. and he doesn't get out of there well till 5 in the afternoon. And that sponsor has kept me in good stead. And getting Clancy as my sponsor and the Pacific Group and my home group were two of the better sober decisions that I've made in Alcoholics Anonymous. But Clancy always tells me that my job, if I am ever asked to share, is to impress upon you newcomers the fatal, fatal nature of this malady called alcoholism. And alcoholism is not funny if you have to not only survive it yourself, but see what other people survive. And I've got a nice roommate here tonight, Stephanie, and we were talking about that a little bit in our rooms. And I don't know the price you paid for your seat here tonight in this room, but I am sad to say, and I will never be proud to report, that the price I paid for that seat here tonight was I laid down my little 5-year-old son and my little 6-year-old daughter. Because a liquid called vodka, a liquid that looked no more or less innocuous than the water in my water bottle, was so powerful over my mind. It was more powerful than the love I had for my own 2 children. It was more powerful than a maternal bond. And I will never, ever be proud to share that. I spoke one time up at Seattle, and I think Patrick was speaking somewhere else, and we usually go together. But on that particular trip, he couldn't go because he had another commitment. And my daughter at the time, she was probably about 22. She loved Seattle, and she goes, "Mom, I'll go with you." And I said, "You know, great." And so I got her a plane ticket, and she and I flew up, and we stayed in the hotel, and we had a lovely weekend. And I was the Sunday morning speaker. And I'll never forget, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm up here to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll be darned if that little kid didn't carry the message to her mom one more time. Because when I was done talking, the people lined up to shake the speaker's hand. And I'll never forget, this guy turned to my kid who was standing right next to me, and he says, "Man, your mom has one of the greatest stories in Alcoholics Anonymous." And my kid didn't miss a beat. She looked at him and she said, "You know what? Not if you were her kid." And I hope that I never forget that, because we have a whole lot of broken hearts and broken people as collateral damage in the wake of our drinking, and it's not okay to hurt people. I had my first drink when I was 13, and I've come to understand after reading the book Alcoholics Anonymous that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. But I did not understand that at 13 years old. I didn't even know what an alcoholic was. I'm described in the book Alcoholics Anonymous as an alcoholic that is never mildly intoxicated. I'm always more or less insanely drunk. So I'm either sober or drunk. There's like no in between for me. And when you're that kind of a drinker, you tend to draw a lot of attention to yourself, and you get into trouble pretty quickly. I'm also described in AA vernacular, though it's not spelled out word for word in this book, as a blackout puking drinker. There has never been a time that I've ingested beverage alcohol that I did not puke my guts out. That's how physically allergic I am to alcohol. Toward the end of my drinking, I used to have to plug my nose just to not smell the alcohol before I could keep it down long enough to just heat up my head and give me that light, goofy feeling that was always produced by beverage alcohol. Because if I smelled it before I got it down long enough, I'd retch and gag and puke it all up before it took effect. I'm the kind of girl that if you were on a date with me while I was drinking, you always kind of had to drive real far to the right, because I was the girl that you had to pull over to the curb, because I was always puking my brains out. Really attractive, right, fellas? But that's the kind of drinker I am. I'm also described in AA vernacular as a blackout drinker. And for our new people, being a blackout drinker is actually a diagnosable feature of alcoholism. And what that means, I can only share my experience with that, is, when I drink alcohol, I never know when it's going to happen, if it's going to happen, or how long it's going to happen, where I will have lapses of memory, and I will do strange and incredible things that, quite frankly, I'd be mortified to do in a sober state of mind, only to feel that pitiful and that incomprehensible demoralization they talk about in this book the next day when people recite my antics from the night before. But I don't understand any of that as a young 13-year-old drinking alcohol. I don't even know what an alcoholic is. I ran away from home at age 15, and it had absolutely nothing to do with my alcoholism. But I always share about it because many well-meaning, and I really want to reiterate, many well-meaning healthcare professionals led me to believe it did. Our stories disclose in a general way, so I'm not going to go into graphic detail, but I had been put in 2 foster homes prior to the age of 15 because of the illicit nature of the relationship my father had with my sister and I. If you were a girl and you had a budding teenage body, you certainly were not safe to live at home with my father. When I was 15, my sister was 1 year older than I was. She was 16, and she ran away from home at 16 and left me at home alone for a year with my dad. Let's just say it was not a good year. And I was in high school, and we did not have like any repressed memories, and there was no like real family secrets. The counselors at my high school, the guidance counselors, all knew our family history because I did come in through the foster system, and my family had a paper trail a mile long. But I started to miss school, and they called home, and things weren't kind of connecting, so they sent child services out to our home, and they interviewed my dad, and that very afternoon they removed my dad from our home, and I faced going into a foster home for the first time without my older sister at 15 years old. I did not want to face my dad in courts. I did not want to be interviewed by all those people, and I certainly did not want to go in a foster home by myself. So I literally dropped out of high school and ran away from home at 15 to avoid all of that. Now, most alcoholics don't like school. School is usually a proposition of a whole lot of hard work, discipline, and structure over an elongated period of time without any type of, instant gratification. And we don't tend to do real well. I think the book describes us as like childlike and grandiose, um, undisciplined and all that. However, I was one of those weird alcoholics, and I think children escape their childhoods in different ways. And I used to escape my childhood through books. I'm actually an associate English professor by profession today, and I teach high school English as well. And back when I was a kid, my home life was just always about police and child services and divorces and infidelities and craziness. And I used to just lose myself in books, so I was like this avid reader as a kid. And because I was a good reader, I was always a really good test taker and really good in school. Another way I used to escape my childhood is the minute I got home from school, there was a public park across the street, and it had 16 tennis courts. So I used to go over there, and at 9 years old, someone gave me a racket, and I started fiddling around after school. And a very famous tennis pro, he was actually world famous, but he had retired, saw my potential, and he kind of took me on as his little protege, and he started coaching me. So at 15 years old, I was ranked 23 in the state of California as an upcoming tennis amateur. I was an amazing straight A student at school, and I was a decent looking kid when I was young, and so I was popular at school. So at school I was academic, athletic, popular, Tami, and those three ingredients are pretty good if you want to do well in school. I watch a lot of my little guys and girls in high school struggle to get through just one day of high school. If they're not academically or athletically inclined, or they're not fortunate or whatever in their looks, sadly to say that's still the case today in school. But I had all three, but home was never a safe place to land. And so dropping out of school was huge for me because it was the only modicum of safety I'd known in my life up to that time. And so I was really a lost soul by leaving school at that time in my life. So I bumped around on a few friends' couches, but eventually that tennis pro that had been coaching me, he's now invested 6 years of his life with me, and he's trained me and given me all this free coaching, and I'm winning all kinds of awards, and he's got a vested interest, and he locates me and he says, Tam, I can't have you running the streets like this. I have a condominium with an extra bedroom. Come and stay with me, and I will face your dad in the courts, and I will go to child services with you until we can find a safe place for you to live. So I moved in with him. I was 15 and he was 40. And for obvious reasons that I don't need to go into, I was a very precocious, sexualized 15-year-old. Sadly to say, he fell to the temptation, and I just became his live-in girlfriend at 15 years old. He had 2 children from a previous marriage. They were about 5 and 6. And they used to come and stay with him on the weekends. And clearly nobody knew I was 15 years old or he would have gone to jail. But these kids would show up, and by no means is alcohol any regular part of my life. But looking back, I believe he was probably a heavy drinker. And he would come home on the weekends and do shooters of tequila. I call it tequila if you're an alcoholic of my type, or kamikazes. And I remember one evening I got into some tequila with him, and I went into a blackout, and I acted like a crazy fool in front of his 2 little kids, and they went home and told their mom. And his mom told him, you know what, your children cannot come and see you if that crazy woman, Tami, is still living there. So at 15, I have now jeopardized his right to see his children, their right to see their father, his ex-wife's right to have a break on the weekends, all because of a result of my drinking. Yet I have no connection with any of this because I don't know what alcoholism is, and I certainly don't know I'm suffering from it. So Dennis has a huge albatross around his neck. He's living with a 15-year-old. He can't see his kids. He doesn't know what to do with me. But again, because I was such a voracious reader and a good student, he knew that I could probably pass the GED exam. And so at 16 years old, it was 1 week after he signs me up to take this GED exam. Certainly wasn't an idea that originated in my head. But when you're a woman and you're dependent on men, you will tend to do what the flavor of the month suggests when he's paying your rent. So he says, I think you should take the GED exam. And I'm like, okay. So he fills out the forms. And 1 week after my 16th birthday, I remember I'm down at this local center taking this GED exam. It was like a 5-hour test. But again, I'm a good test taker. I'm a good reader. I'm a college professor today by profession. So this was an easy thing for me to do even back then. And we received notification a couple weeks later in the mail that I indeed had passed this GED exam. And Dennis wasted no time in walking me down to a local community college out where we live. And he had me try out for his friend's tennis team. His friend was the coach of the local community college tennis team. And I was certainly good enough to play the varsity string. And then he walked me right over to admissions and records, and he enrolled me in 12 units with the hope that I would be in school all day and not cause problems for him. And on the weekends, I'd have to travel with this tennis team playing tournaments so that hopefully he could see his children again. So I went into what the book talks about, my first swearing off period. And for you new people, be careful what you hear in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why our book is the only authority, because I used to come into AA meetings, and I know this is going to come as a huge surprise to many of you, but alcoholics love to embellish. That means exaggerate. So I remember when I was new, I'd come into AA and I'd hear people say things like, I didn't draw a sober breath for 7 years before I came into Alcoholics Anonymous. I drank 24/7 around the clock. Well, first of all, those are both physically impossible to do. But I would hear stuff like that when I was new and sit in the back of your rooms, and I'd hear things like, once I drink, I cannot stop, and the only thing that stops me is death, comatose, or the police. And I think, then you know what, I must not be an alcoholic. And it wasn't until these crusty old timers like my sponsor Clancy got my nose in this book, and do you know what it says? It says we swear off alcohol, and that we can stop. It says that many of us will have brief intervals, followed always by yet a worse relapse. But see, I didn't understand that at 16 years old. I didn't know what an alcoholic was. So I'm one of those alcoholics described in the books that when I get in trouble with alcohol, I will always swear off alcohol. Always when I'm in trouble, I'm done with alcohol. I'm never going to drink again. And, loading up the bottles and throwing it all in the trash. And I swear off with a solemn oath, I'm never going to drink again. And then I go through a series, and this tends to run a lot with the women I sponsor. We like to reinvent ourselves. So we're crazy, drunken, chaotic women, and then all of a sudden we reinvent ourselves, and we do Kabbalah, and we do yoga, and we do religion, and we do all these things, cleanses and health foods and all this, always trying to clean up the outsides to kind of cure those crazy, crazy little insides that live inside of us. But I have absolutely no idea I'm suffering from a spiritual malady. So I swear off alcohol and I reinvent myself, and I'm going to be academic, athletic Tami again, just like I was in my childhood. And so I start taking these 12 units, and I have to make an A. I cannot get a B. And I'm on the dean's list all 4 semesters that I'm in that college, and I'm playing tennis, and I'm eating brown rice and yogurt and kashi for breakfast, and my body is a shrine, and I'm shaving my toenails. I'm shaving my legs and painting my toenails and conditioning my hair, and I am like a specimen of, this athletic excellence or whatever. But that's the kind of structure that I have to impose upon myself, that rigidity and that insane, unattainable structure just to not pick up that drink. I'm either bad Tami or I've got to be like perfectly good Tami. And so for the next 2 years, I played on that team. I won them all kinds of awards. I was on the dean's list all 4 semesters. My body was a specimen. And only 2 times from 16 to 18 did I pick up a drink. And I'll be darned, because I'm described in the book as an alcoholic that is never mildly intoxicated. I'm always insanely drunk when I drink. Both times I drew attention to myself. I got arrested for public drunkenness, but the minute they saw my paper trail, now I'm a runaway. I'm underage and I'm a runaway, so I'm a ward of the state. And both times they put me in a lockdown facility, 2 times. And the only 2 times I drank for 2 years, I end up in a lockdown facility both times. But the minute I crossed that threshold, and they got my cumulative file of being in a foster care system, the diagnosis changed from the focus of the big pink elephant in the room is Tami's drunk to emotional and mental disorders, trauma due to childhood, and post-traumatic stress syndrome. And those doctors rightfully treated my symptoms of depression with antidepressants, of anxiety because I can't handle life on life's terms, and I can't sleep without some type of sleep aid. And so they treat me with the medical model. But I don't understand that I don't suffer from a medical problem. I'm suffering from a spiritual malady. My problem is spiritual in nature, not medical in nature, but I don't understand that because I don't know what an alcoholic is. So during that time, I graduate that school, and at 18 years old, because I had a 4.0 GPA and I had won awards for that tennis team, I received something called the Chancellor's Award, where a few department heads picked some students that demonstrated some type of academic and/or athletic excellence. And that Chancellor's Award at 18 years old afforded me an opportunity to go to any one of 5 state universities down in California where I live. And for 2 more years, they were going to give me a full ride of tuition, textbook, housing, and living expenses so I could finish school and get a bachelor's degree. And all I had to do was take 12 units and play on their tennis team. And guess what I did, Alkies? Yeah, there's my Alkies. I quit. Are you kidding me? I had been too good, too disciplined, and too structured for too long. I was absolutely exhausted at 18 years old because I intuitively knew at some deep level, I intuitively knew that spiritual malady, that there's no way that I could sustain that any longer. To heck with it, I quit. And they talk about that in the book. It says that we have special skills, aptitudes, and abilities, that we not only build a bright outlook for ourselves, but also for our loved ones. And then we pull the whole thing down over our head with a senseless series of sprees. But I don't understand that at 18 because I still don't know what an alcoholic is. So I'm tired of being too good and too disciplined for too long, and I've been good girl Tammy for too long, so I decided to heck with it, and I'm going to be bad, reckless Tammy. And I go down to the beach, and back then, blonde hair and blue eyes and tan skin and white teeth were really popular, and I'm a great tennis player, so I'm at all the local clubs down in the marina, and these guys see me on the court, and of course I'm ranked 23 in the state of California, so they all want me to play mixed doubles with them, and I'm playing with footsies down with the men in the marina, having a great time. And I'm still living with this guy, Dennis, and I cheat on him, and we make up, and we break up, and he throws me out, and I beg him to let me back in that craziness that we do in relationships when we're not sober. And that went on for a couple of years, but then I got arrested again on a DUI charge, and they put me in jail like overnight, and it really scared me. So I called Dennis with my tail between my legs, and he bailed me out, and I swore off alcohol again with a solemn oath. I'm never gonna drink again. And I get rid of all the bottles, and this time I'm going to go back to school, and maybe it was the 12 units. I'm going to go for 15 this time. Now, I hadn't played tennis the way you have to play in order to be a top-ranked player. I'm just playing at clubs, kind of showing off my talents. So I knew I couldn't be in competitive tennis anymore, plus I was too old. So I decided, if I can't be the best at something, then heck with it, I quit. So I decided instead of playing tennis, I'm going to become a triathlete. And I go down to the local health food store, and I want brown rice and yogurt and kashi for breakfast. And I get an athletic trainer, and I'm training, and I'm riding bikes, and I'm swimming laps, and I'm running up and down hills and doing all these 10Ks. And I'm imposing that rigid structure. I can't get a B. I have to get an A in school, that I have to impose upon myself to be good girl, athletic, academic Tammy again, doing the same thing and expecting different results. And for a while I carried on with that because the book tells us that we can stay sober and on good behavior for prescribed amounts of time. However, my prescribed amounts of time are not lasting as long. And during this time, this guy moves in right next door to our condominium complex, right next door to the one Dennis and I shared, had vacated. And this guy moved in, a handsome guy, and he's wearing a 10K shirt. And he caught my eye, and I caught his, and we were playing like, love connection with our eyes. The fact I'm living next door to him with my boyfriend, just an incidental, right? And we kindle up this friendship, and I find out he's an OBGYN, he's a doctor, and he just got out of a 10-year marriage, and he's just moved into his place, after his divorce. And I said, I'm a 10K runner too. And he said, really? Do you know a good gym around here? And I said, sure. And I walk him down to my gym, and we sign him up. And every morning at 6 a.m., he's my athletic trainer. We train together, and he spots me, and I spot him. And then we're running 10K races all over, Northern and Southern California on the weekends. And again, my boyfriend's paying my rent. No big deal. He kind of owes me that, right, for no reason. And I knew that this guy, Rick, had a huge crush on me. And I'm taking a microbiology and a physiology course, and he's a doctor. So Wednesday afternoons, he's off his practice, and we're down by the pool that my boyfriend's paying my rent for. And I'm laying out in the sun with him, and he's helping me with my microbiology homework. And the problem was Rick met me in a swearing off period, and I was athletic, academic, outgoing, popular Tammy, like I always am in my swearing off periods. But one night, Dennis came home, and we got into some drinking, and we ended up, I blacked out, and we got into one of those knockdown, drag-out fights that we can get into that became so loud and so violent that next door neighbor, Rick, had to call the police. Well, Rick didn't know. He didn't have to give the police directions to where we live because they'd been there many times before. And the police show up, and Dennis is at the door talking to the police, and I see that neighbor Rick standing behind Dennis saying, "Is Tami okay? Is Tami okay?" And Dennis eventually got rid of the police and got rid of that nosy neighbor Rick. And then Dennis and I go upstairs. You know how we are. We're beating each other up at 9 o'clock at night. We're talking about each other's mothers at 10 o'clock at night. The police show up at 11 o'clock at night. We get rid of the police at 12 o'clock at night, and then at 12:30, it's like, "Oh, baby, you're my soulmate. I love you." Because we're so whack and we're so extreme. And Dennis and I spend the rest of the night upstairs professing our love to each other like a bad Hallmark card. And I wake up the next morning and I do exactly what's described in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. That after a while, a drinking alcoholic cannot separate the true from the false. That after a while, the only life a drinking alcoholic comes to understand is their drinking life. And I thought nothing the next morning of taking a little liquid makeup, covering up the black eyes, the bruises, and the choke marks. And let's be fair, ladies, at least in this case, I was not a battered anything. They used to call me Tammy Tyson. I beat the crap out of him too. There was no like one-sided deal there. And I put a backpack on my back and I go off to Cal State University, Northridge, like there's nothing wrong with my life. About 2 o'clock that afternoon, I'm pulling in the underground parking of that condominium complex. Now, I've been drinking the night before, so I'm hungover. I've been beaten up the night before, so my body is sore. I have not slept all night because we had to make up and profess our love to each other, so I've had no sleep. I've been sitting in classes all day, and it's 2 o'clock the following day, and I'm getting out of my car, and my jaw is tight, my back is rigid, I'm restless, I'm irritable, and I am discontented. And I'm walking toward the elevator, and all of a sudden a thought occurs to me, wait a minute, there's a huge bottle of vodka on my kitchen sink. Liquid relief is just moments away. Now, I haven't seen the vodka, I haven't smelled the vodka, I certainly haven't tasted the vodka. Thinking about a clear liquid that looks no different than the water in this bottle, just thinking about it, my entire demeanor changed, and my jaw loosens up, and I'm walking toward the elevator, and I'm feeling light and free. And if you identify with that, you're probably an alcoholic, because clear liquids just do not have that power over other people. And I get in the elevator just knowing liquid reliefs are coming, and as I go to push number 3, I look, and that guy Rick that called the police the night before is right at the elevator door. And I went to go push 3, and I'm hitting the closed door button, and his hand wedges between the doors, and Rick walks into the elevator. And prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous and having good mentors like Hector and my sponsor Clancy, I used to use a tremendous amount of foul language and cursing and a tremendous amount of inappropriate sexual attire and sexual humor to keep especially you men like a little bit off your footing with me so you could never just look me in the eye and have an adult conversation with me. So Rick breaks the silence and he says, "Tammy, you and I need to talk about what happened last night." So I pull out the tough cussing girl, you know, my big barrage of tricks. And I'm like, "You effing know what went down last night. You're the one that called the effing cops on me, and I'm really effing tired." And he just took his hands and he put them on my shoulders. And that really disarmed me because I'm used to guys going like, whoa. And so I realized like the tough cussing thing wasn't going to put him off his game. So I pull out the seductress, and of course he's a surgeon, so he's got a suit and tie on. And I just grab his silk tie and I pull his neck like right into my nose, and I take a deep whiff and I go, "God, your cologne, you always smell so amazing." And he just pushed me away, and he grabbed my chin and he jerked my chin up, and he looked right down into my eyes with those brown eyes of his, and he said, "Tammy, I've really come to care for you, and I really have strong feelings for you, and I can see you're struggling with something in life, and I want to help you, but I don't know what's wrong with you." And man, that's like the worst thing you can hear when you're an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism and you don't know it, because I've always known there's something wrong with me. I have never felt like I fit in. And I always thought it was the abuse and the foster homes and my dad, but I was so painfully aware now in my early 20s that I am so abnormal that my role now in life is just to fake it till I make it and pretend to the whole world. And I'm starting to lie to myself about who and what I am, and I'm believing my own lies. Because like the book says, alcohol has got me to a point where I am constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself about the role that alcohol plays in my life, and more importantly, the role I play in the lives of other people. And so I didn't know what to do, so I walked off the elevator and I went into his apartment and I told him the cry of every drinking alcoholic. I told them about the foster homes. I told them about the abuse. I told them about my father. And I told them one day I am going to finish my education. And one day when I get my bachelor's degree, I'm going to get a job. And one day when I get a job, I'm not going to live with abusive men. And one day and one day and one day, because the cry of every drinking alcoholic is, look, I know my life looks a little whack right now, but I have a plan. And when my plan comes to fruition, it's all going to be okay. And newcomers, every alcoholic that is in this room before they surrendered, believed in their innermost self that they could beat this sucker on their own. But like the book says, no human power can relieve you of your alcoholism, Patrick. But God can and will if you seek him. It doesn't say God should, or he could, or he might. It says God can and he will if you seek him. But I don't know to ask for that kind of help because I don't know what an alcoholic is. But for whatever reason, and today I do believe it's God's grace, I broke down and cried for the first time as a little 23-year-old broken kid that I was and always had been. No more cussing Tami with a bratitude. No more sexual seductress luring Tami. I just sobbed like a broken kid. And Rick held me. And I let him hold me. And I left that night and went right next door into the condominium that I shared with Dennis, and I never did get that drink of vodka that night. I actually just went to sleep for the first time in many, many months without a drink. I was just exhausted. And I woke up the next day and I felt that fear that they talk about in this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. That fear, newcomers, that comes in 100 different forms. Because another human being saw the broken truth about Tami, and I am constitutionally incapable of being able to handle that truth. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear. And they don't have a higher power that they can pray to for strength. And they don't have a girlfriend in AA like Lindsay who they can just call and talk those dumb fears through with as sober sisters. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear. And I took that swig of vodka the next morning, excuse me, and that vodka heated up my chest and it produced that ease and that comfort. And in my drunken stupor that morning, I came up with a plan. Now, newcomers, every alcoholic has a plan. Never a good plan. And my plan that morning was that I had the key to Rick's condominium unit because I used to take care of his exotic plants when he would travel to medical conventions. And Dennis and I had been going back and forth now for 8 years, and things weren't going real well with he and I. And I knew that rich doctor surgeon next door had a thing for me. And my plan that morning in my drunken stupor was to just take everything out of my unit with Dennis, move it next door into Rick's, get Rick between the sheets, and seduce the broken image I saw of me reflected in his eyes the night before, and replace it with Tami, the sexual goddess. So I spent that day moving, and Rick came home that afternoon. Oh, and I was busy. And Rick came home that afternoon, and where are Al-Anons? Where's our Al-Anons in the room tonight? Okay. Oh, good, there's a lot of you. Okay, you'll all get this. They won't, never will get it. Rick not only married me, Rick not only let me stay, but Al-Anons 3 weeks later, Rick walked me down the aisle and he married me. And the day that Rick said I do was the day that he qualified for Al-Anon. His life was never the same. And look, I don't have time to go into all the devastating things that happened the next couple of years of that marriage. But I think it's important that I share that I punished Rick for everything that my father had ever done to me. I punished Rick for all the abuse that my dad had dished out. And because Rick was pre-Al-Anon and pre a program of recovery for himself, he sadly took the butt kicking, and I damn near destroyed his soul. My ex-husband came up in one of the most horrific alcoholic homes I've heard of to date. He was so academically brilliant because, like me, he also lost himself in academics and books because his home environment was so unsafe. Rick was so academically brilliant that he made it to high school at 12. He made it to college at 16. He made it to medical school at 20. And at 24 years old, he was an air flight surgeon in the Vietnam War for the Air Force. And at 24 years old, he was sewing our boys' bodies back up together after they were being medevaced off the fields. And he survived all that and a 10-year marriage, but was only married to me for a couple of years, and he was stuttering and stammering and a nervous wreck, and he didn't even know his own shadow, because I'm not a funny drunk. So I'm not going to stand up here and insult you or the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, or certainly give any credence to that with alcoholism, because like I said earlier, my job is not to entertain you up here tonight. My job is to impress upon our new friends the fatal, fatal nature of this malady called alcoholism. And I damn near destroyed that man's soul. And his only crime was he really just wanted to help a broken kid. That marriage produced 2 children, and today I have a son, Alex, that's 27, and I have a daughter, Chelsea, that's 28. And through the grace of God, I was so physically sick with both my pregnancies. I had a condition called hyperemesis, where I didn't just puke the first trimester, I puked all 9 months. And I was so physically sick, I couldn't stand the smell of perfume. I couldn't stand the taste of coffee. I certainly could not stand the taste of alcohol. I went 9 months pregnant with my daughter. My ex-husband always hates me sharing this because he's an OBGYN. 6 weeks after I gave birth to my daughter, my breast milk dried up because I found out I was pregnant again. This time with my son. You're supposed to like wait at least 12 weeks in between kids. And I was pregnant again, and I went another 9 months with my son without being able to pick up a drink. But about 5 weeks after he was born, I woke up. Now, mind you, I haven't had a drink in almost 22 months. But I wake, or 24 months, almost 2 years, I have not had 1 stitch of alcohol. But I wake up one morning stone cold sober, and I'm in a 4,000 square foot home. I'm married to a surgeon. I've got all this money. I've got a 1-year-old baby, a 1-month-old little boy, and I felt the fear that they talk about in this book because I was so painfully aware that I brought 2 living human beings into the world. I'm in this big grown-up, mature adult life, and I am a completely crippled human being myself, and I knew it to my innermost self. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel that fear. And I started to drink again. And at that point, like the book says, that many women cross recognition, beyond recognition in a very short period of time. And that was certainly my story. And I pretty much became almost a daily drinker. Just to illustrate one way that I drank, I remember my husband's starting to come home and he's finding a drunken mother taking care of his infant children. So my pre-Al-Anon husband decides to hire a full-time housekeeper to stay home and take care of me and my house. And he sends our 2 children out to daycare. Now, I don't work, I don't go to school. He pays my bills. I got someone taking care of me and my house, someone taking care of my children. That's suicide if you're an alcoholic of my type. And I remember one afternoon with all my free time, because I can drink with impunity now, and isn't that our goal? I remember I have like a 3-story house. It's a chalet style, and I'm standing in the middle deck that surrounds our whole backyard, and it's over our pool, and I want to get a tan. And I'm greased up in baby oil with my little bikini and my tumbler of vodka, drunker than a skunk. And I'm looking down at the pool, but I'm also looking up at the 3rd-story roof. And in my drunken stupor, I'm like, you know, the roof is closer to the sun than the pool. So I get this big, long extension ladder, and I shimmy up this ladder with my tumbler of vodka and my towel and my sunglasses. And I lay the towel down on our chalet roof. Now, I live in a cul-de-sac, so all the neighbors are looking at me in my bikini on my roof, you know, with my sunglasses, sunbathing. They're like, oh my God, it's that drunken woman again across the street. And Rick picks up the kids from daycare half day because they're just little guys. And they pull into the cul-de-sac, and there's Mom, like on the roof, you know, wild and drunk. And he parks the car, and they pull out, and Chelsea, Alex, and Rick, all 3 of them look up at me. And for whatever reason, I just walked to like the low end of that 3rd-story roof, and I literally jumped off the roof onto my husband. And he's screaming and trying to get me off of him, and he's spinning with me on his back, and the kids are screaming, and the neighbors come out. And all Rick really did was he tried to just reach up to grab me to get me off of him. And his watch, he had a huge metal watch, and it whacked me like really hard in the side of the eye, and it sliced my eye, and apparently head injuries bleed, and I'm gushing blood out of my eyes, and he's screaming, and the kids are screaming. And finally they got me to bed, and I, you know, just slept it off like I always did. But I woke up the next morning, and I had this huge hematoma and slice in my eye. And because I knew that him and those neighborhood ladies were talking about me, I went into the local police division with that hematoma and that sliced eye, and I filed felony battery charges on Rick. Those detectives walked into his office with a waiting room full of women patients that had been going to him with an impeccable record and a top doctor in our community, and they arrested him in front of his patients and in front of his staff for felony battery charges, and it made the local papers. That was the only sober parent that Chelsea and Alex had. That's what I do when I drink alcohol, folks. That's the effect that alcohol has on Tami. It was very shortly after he spent that night in jail that he met a group of people called Al-Anon. And I am an alcoholic that is deeply indebted to Al-Anon because a doctor in our community was also a member of Al-Anon, and he went and picked my husband Rick up out of jail, and he said, I think I need to take you to an Al-Anon meeting, because Rick used to come to work like with scratches, and he'd say, that was a cat, and this doctor used to say, that's a big cat. And he knew, Dr. Jack knew, and so Rick starts attending these Al-Anon meetings. Now my husband starts going to meetings with women, that dress becomingly. He's going to meetings with women that don't cuss like drunken sailors. He's going to meetings with women that don't dress seductive and provocatively and pass their bodies all around town. He's going to meetings with women that take care of their children in their homes. He's going to meetings with women that honor the fidelity and the commitment to their marriages. Is it any wonder I feel the fear they talk about in his book, Alcoholics Anonymous, when he starts going to Al-Anon? Because I'm losing my control. And I'll never forget, he came home one day after about 6 weeks of those Al-Anon meetings. And of course, like any good alcoholic, we have to put down anything that threatens us. And I'd be like, oh, you're going to go to your let's all feel sorry for Dr. Rick Harem. And they sit in a circle and feel sorry for Rick. And he came home and he said, you know, Tami, you can go to a hell in a handbasket if you want to, but you're not going to take the kids and I with you any longer. And I saw something in his eyes, and I knew those Al-Anons were giving him the strength to stand up to the insidious insanity of my alcoholism. And one more time I felt that fear. And I did the only thing an alcoholic knows how to do when they feel fear, and I picked a fight with him. I went out to the liquor store. I bought a huge bottle of vodka. I plugged my nose. I downed it as quickly as I could. It heated up my chest. It gave me a goofy feeling in my head. I got up on the freeway out where I live in California, and I saw a call box on the side of the road. And in my drunken stupor, I thought the call box was a payphone, and I'm like, I'm gonna make a phone call. And then I just like plow my car into this call box, and 30 days later, I'm standing in front of a woman judge. And she's reading my rap sheet, and she says, you know, Tami, your rich doctor husband isn't going to buy you out of jail time on this DUI. You're going to actually serve some time. However, I'm going to waive 30 days of your sentence and have you serve it in a lockdown facility. Now, I mentioned earlier that from 16 to 18, I had drank 2 times. Both times ended up in a lockdown facility, and the diagnosis was mental and emotional disorders, trauma due to childhood, and post-traumatic stress syndrome, because they never looked at the elephant in the living room, drunk. They looked at my childhood issues. When I was, probably my daughter was 4 or 5, I was still seeing therapists. My ex-husband would buy the best doctors that money could buy. And I remember one time he wasn't giving me the attention I felt I deserved, and I took an entire bottle of antidepressants. And then I realized I might die. So I called 911 and handed the phone to my 4-year-old. And my 4-year-old had to call the paramedics to come and put me in the hospital. And I was put in a lockdown unit for that, for attempted suicide. And now I'm in my 4th lockdown facility, and those doctors told me what they'd been telling me since I was 15 years old. Tami, you're clinically depressed as a result of your childhood, and you're drinking alcohol to self-medicate your pain. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, the old-timers had a new name for the effect that alcohol appeared to have on me, as described in this book, in the doctor's opinion. They suggested that I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol and that I may be alcoholic. In that lockdown unit, I used to tell those doctors I'd wake up out of a blackout and I'd go downstairs, I'd see broken glass, broken children, a broken husband, and a broken home. I'd just go right back up the stairs, turn up the heating blanket, suck my thumb, and think of ways to kill myself. And of course, I had a feeble attempt at suicide when my daughter was 4. And those doctors told me the best hope for me is the right combination of antidepressants and medications to kind of make it so that I don't have to self-medicate with alcohol. But none of those actions are my fault. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, the old-timers had a new name for a mother that attempted to take her life in front of her own child without ever giving a flying crap how it would affect that kid. They called it alcoholism, selfishness, self-centeredness. The world always revolves around Tami's childhood pain. Forget my 2 children are in their childhood with a drunken mother. It's still always about me. In that lockdown facility, I told those doctors that in my swearing off periods off of alcohol, I'd go down to the local gym, work out with all you men, of course, and then I'd take all you men up to the pub, buy drinks on the house on my husband's dime, always playing the big shot, taking credit for money I never even earned. And in that lockdown facility, they told me that taking my husband's money to get affection or acceptance from men was really my way indirectly of getting back that acceptance that I'd been so poorly robbed of in my childhood from my father. So none of those actions were my fault. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, the old-timers had a new name for that too. They called it stealing. And not only did I steal my husband's money and play big shot on his dime and on his hard work, but as a wife and a mother of 2 small children, I used to take strange men to those daytime motels that I would meet at the gym. And let's just say I did what drunken alcoholic women do in those daytime hotels. And in that lockdown facility, the doctors told me that my dad gave me a script when I was 5 years old, that my only worth was my sexuality. And all I was doing in those hotels was acting out a script that I'd been so poorly given in my childhood. But none of those actions in those motels were really my fault. I was a victim. Later, when I came through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, old-timers like my sponsor Clancy had a new name for that behavior too. They called it cheating. By the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, my mother and my husband had paid close to $100,000 for 4 lockdown facilities from the time I was 16 until the time I was 32, to find out that living inside of me was this victim child from this sordid childhood, but none of the crazy actions in my adult life were really my fault. And for a buck in one of your baskets, the old timers in AA said, no kid, you're a liar, you're a cheat, you're a thief, and you're probably just an alcoholic suffering from alcoholism. And God, I needed it to be so much more. You know, young people in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's a universal truth in these rooms that's not mentioned in this book. You don't like these old timers? Don't worry about it, you'll never be one. You know? We are constitutionally incapable of being honest with ourselves. And that's where a good sponsor or a good person experienced with recovery from alcoholism can help you. And so the condition of my getting out of that lockdown unit is I have to start attending AA meetings. And I wear low-cut tops, and I wear these little high Daisy Duke shorts, and I come to meetings late, and I leave meetings early, and I spend most of my time in the parking lot flirting with you men. And I took 5 of those 30-day chips. And on my 5th 30-day chip, I stood at a podium like this, and I told you all something about God and how wonderful my life was. But what I didn't mention is that Al-Anon had rightly convinced my husband that after 3 lockdown facilities, in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, $100,000, the best therapy that money could buy, his wife is still driving drunk with his kids. And those Al-Anons didn't play games and say, oh, sweetie, keep coming back. They told Rick, if something happens to those children, Rick, you're not 50% responsible for their deaths. You are 100% responsible, because Tami is incapable of making a sane, sober decision for a 4 and a 5-year-old. And Rick tried to evict me through the courts, and I created such a scene that one night in the middle of the night, working the hours that he works, delivering babies all night long and seeing office patients, 80-hour work week, he just kidnapped the kids in the middle of the night one night and stole out and was living in an apartment. But because I was enjoying the attention I was getting from the men in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was kind of having a good time, a little break from being a wife and a mother, so I didn't go looking for them. And on my 5th 30-day chip, I failed to mention to you that I hadn't seen my own husband or children in 67 days. If you do the math, that's 2 months and a week, because I was enjoying flirting with the men in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember I took my 5th 30-day chip, and this mean old timer came out to the parking lot, and he said, blonde Tami, you got a phone call. And I walked into the clubhouse, and I picked up the phone, and it was Rick. And he said, Tami, are you sober and with the arrogance of an alcoholic? I said, yeah, Rick, I'm sober. In fact, hey, I've taken another 30-day chip today. And he said, Tami, he said, if you're sober, I signed Alex up for T-ball. He said, your son turned 5 3 weeks ago. And I was enjoying the attention from the men in Alcoholics Anonymous that I forgot my son's 5th birthday. And he said, Tami, Alex is wetting the bed every night, and he's having night terrors. And he said, your 6-year-old daughter, Chelsea, can't even make it through a half a day of kindergarten without ending up in the nurse's office doubled over with a stomach ache. So if you're sober, Tami, as much as I don't want to see you, woman, he said, I signed Alex up for T-ball to take his mind off his little troubles, and I think it's important that he sees you come out and support him today. And I got the address to that Little League field, and as I walked up, my husband, raising our 2 children out of a 1-bedroom apartment somewhere, you know, working the hours that he worked, was in a full team uniform with another man from Al-Anon, and he was the assistant coach of Alex's team, because someone had to be there for my kid. And my little daughter, Chelsea, was wearing this beautiful little pinafore sundress, and her hair was back in a beautiful French braid. And I later found out that the women from Al-Anon were going to Rick's apartment at night, and they were packing my kids' little kindergarten lunches, and they were doing their hair and helping them with their homework, because their mom was busy getting attention from the men in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my son Alex came out of the dugout, and he was 5, and he had this little batting helmet on with these little cleats and these little baseball pants. And I just remember looking at my family and walking away, and there was a guy sitting in the back of a truck with a huge cooler of beer, and I picked up a beer from him that afternoon. 3 days later, I came to 45 minutes away from my home down near the LAX airport. To this day, almost 22 years later, I have no recollection of how I got from that Little League field almost an hour away to this woman's alley. This woman takes her trash out, and she finds me in the back hugging onto a backpack, and I'd been out drinking for 3 days, and I have no recollection of any of it. And she takes me in her kitchen, and I'm sitting in her kitchen with an ice pack on the side of my face, and she's got Rick on the phone giving me directions to pick me up for the last time. Rick pulled up, and he got me in the car, and he broke what seemed like an internal silence, and he handed me this huge manila envelope. And he said, Tammy, your mother and I were in court this morning at 11:30 a.m. in family court. He said, this is a restraining order that says that you cannot come within 100 feet of me, my medical practice, our home, and I've moved our kids back into our home. I am not going to raise them in an apartment anymore. And he says, you cannot go near their school or their daycare. And he said, and your mother and I have temporary legal custody of your children, and you can no longer come near any of us. And he never said another word the whole way home. He turned off the engine in front of our house, and he said, Tammy, he said, I will send you money every month, and when you find a permanent place to stay, I will send you all your things. And he said, but for God's sakes, woman, just please leave me and the children alone. I don't want to do this another day. And I remember I walked, and he said, just call one of your AA bimboy boyfriends to come and pick you up, and I promise you, you will have money every month as long as you need it. And newcomers, I remember walking up the stairs of our home that we had brought Chelsea and Alex home from 5 and 6 months earlier, 5 and 6 years earlier, after I'd given birth to them. I walked past all the family portraits up the stairs. I walked past our dog, and I was literally a walking dead person. I was void of any emotion. It's like my body was moving, and I just remember this ringing in my ears. And I went in the master bedroom, and I just took a gym bag, and I threw some sweats and some t-shirts in the gym bag. And if you've ever come out of a 3-day blackout, I kind of like was disoriented. I wasn't drunk, but I just kind of wasn't even on the planet. I was just moving purposefully, but with no conscience whatsoever. And I remember walking out of my bedroom, and literally I was like a dead person, and Rick was standing right outside our room. And I looked at Rick, and I felt the emotion, and I just said, Rick, I know I need to go. I wanted to go. I was tired. I was so tired. And I said, but can I just please say goodbye to Chelsea and Alex before I leave? And he said, Tammy, the kids are asleep. They have been through hell and back. He said, you could look in on them, but please don't wake your children, Tammy. And I stood outside my son Alex's bedroom, and as I opened his bedroom door, the hall light went right down onto my son. And I'm always so ashamed to admit this, but I saw him. I saw my son. For the first time, and he was 5. And he looked so beautiful. He looked just like his dad. And I remember just looking at this kid, and he looked so alive to me. And I felt this connection, and I remember walking, toward him, and I sat on his bed. And Alex opened up his eyes. I reeked of alcohol. And I remember he started to stroke the inside of my arm, and I just remember looking at him, and I felt this love for this little kid that I had never felt for anybody on the entire time that I had ever been on the earth. And my son, my 5-year-old newcomers, asked me a question that every therapist, my mom, my husband, all you well-meaning AAs, and my little boy just looked at me and he said, Mommy, he goes, when are you gonna come home and just be with us and not go away anymore? And in that instant, I became willing to be willing to do whatever it took. I never wanted to drink alcohol again. And newcomers, I know it like I'm standing here tonight. It wasn't my childhood. It wasn't the foster homes. It wasn't my father. It wasn't the divorces. It wasn't the infidelities. Everything that was going wrong in my life was over a liquid. For God's sakes, newcomers, this is over a flippin' liquid. And if you're in this room tonight and you've got grandparents or parents or a mother, a father, a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, for God's sakes, a child that has cried, listen to me, newcomers, more than 2 times over your drinking, then like the book says, like me, you're a selfish, self-centered human being. There is no shame in being an alcoholic. God, nobody wants this thing. I don't want to be an alcoholic. The shame is that you got a room full of over 100 people here tonight and a book that tells you that you never have to hurt another person again, and you refuse to take the help. And alcohol, not my mommy, not my daddy, not my therapist, alcohol beat me into the willingness to finally surrender. And I asked the God that I didn't even believe in that night to help me. And I went down and I slept in the back of my home group. Here I am, a surgeon's wife with a 4,000 square foot home, 3 cars in the garage paid for, a half an acre of land, you know, a full-time maid, and I'm sleeping in a broken down van behind my home group. And I never felt more at peace than I did that night, because I wasn't going to quit drinking one more time. I was finished. And I have not picked up a drink since. You know, through the grace of God, Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon, at 8 months, I received custody back of my children. We do not promise you that here in Alcoholics Anonymous. But if you are estranged from any family member at all, you have a heck of a better chance of being reunited if you're sober. At 1 year of sobriety, I remember turning to my sponsor and saying, you know what? I got 1 year sober, I got the husband back, the kids back, and I'm going back to school, and I just signed up for 15 units. And he said, good a-hole, now go drop 11 of them. And he said, you know, kid, you can do anything you want to do in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, but you have to be able to do that thing sober. And he says, you do not schedule your AA around your busy little life. You schedule your busy little life around AA. And you're not going to be able to take 15 units and stay sober, because soon down the road you're going to be calling me, I'm going to miss a meeting because I'm school, I've got to study for finals. And that old goat made me do it 4 units at a time, and it took me 18 damn years. But I was a high school dropout, man, and today I just got awarded at I was 51 years old, and I got awarded for my 2nd master's degree for English education. I teach your kids, man, I teach your grandkids. If that doesn't scare you, it should. And I've had a lot of highs and lows in sobriety, but I'm just going to quickly share that I got to see my daughter graduate from UCLA with honors. And my daughter was the keynote speaker of her graduation, and my ex-husband and my current husband did not tell me that was going to, oh, by the way, when I had 9 years of sobriety, my Al-Anon husband made a fatal Al-Anon mistake, and he said, I got a wife that supports a family income, a wife that's sober, a wife that respects the fidelity of our marriage, the wife that takes care of our house and our home, and he thought his problems were solved. That was when I had 9 years sober, so he quit going to Al-Anon. By the time I had 12 years of sobriety, he came home and he said, Tami, I've met a younger woman, and she's younger than you, she's prettier than you, and she's a heck of a lot more fun than you. And I thought I was going to die, and he left me for another woman. But like I said earlier, the inventory is mine, and where was I at fault? And I never, ever in that marriage made Rick feel like he was number one. He came second fiddle to my drinking, and sadly in sobriety, he came second fiddle to my sobriety and my speaking and my sponsoring. And some woman came along and made him feel like he was number one. Now, his inventory about infidelity is between him and his God. But I could certainly see where I failed a 21-year marriage with my selfishness and my self-centeredness, because even in sobriety, it always revolved around me. I had to walk through a very painful divorce that I did not want to walk through. I remember he got a divorce attorney, the best that money could buy, because his girlfriend, you know, wanted to take everything. And so I go get a divorce attorney, and I'm feeling sick, and I'm doubled over, and I'm losing weight, and I finally go to Clancy, and I said, Clancy, none of this feels right. And he said, kid, what are you going after? And I said, spousal support. He said, really, Tami? He goes, what's spousal support? I said, well, I just got this attorney, and spousal support's where you're married to a really rich surgeon for 21 years, and then he leaves you for a younger woman, and then he's got to give you a whole bunch of money for the half-life of that marriage, 11 years, and half his medical practice that you opened up while he was married to me, which was worth over $1 million a year. And Clancy said, Tami, spousal support's about putting someone back on their feet again. And that man put up with your drinking. He afforded you an opportunity to go to meetings every single day. He put you through a bachelor's degree. He put you through a master's degree. And he allowed you to raise 2 children that you had no right to raise in a beautiful home. As far as your sponsor's concerned, he's done his job. So I said, well, what do I do? He goes, why don't you just go ask him what he wants, Tami? So I said, okay. So I go to Rick and I say, Rick, what do you want? And he said, Tami, I just want my medical practice, and I want my new girlfriend. And he said, what do you want? And I just said, look, Rick, I'm about the house and home. I drank away the kids' first 5 and 6 years of their childhood. I don't want them to lose their home and their dogs and be relocated. So I'll tell you what, you keep your $1 million practice a year. I don't want any alimony. You did put me through school. I can support myself, not in the lifestyle of a surgeon's wife, but I am self-supporting. And he gave me the house, and I gave him the practice. And Clancy also in that little talk said, by the way, you're not a goddamn doctor, so what do you want a medical practice for? And And no money changed hands. And I can tell you, there was many, many nights that I regretted that talk with Clancy. But you know what? I've never had a sleepless night. And my ex-husband and I became the best of friends. He was so taken aback that I did that. And those were long-term amends that I owed that man. My daughter graduated college, and I remember saying to my ex-husband, you know, you have a lab coat and a stethoscope and MD behind your name, and you get this big old fat paycheck every month that tells you what you're worth in society. And I'm just high school dropout Tammy, going to college, taking my 4 units, folding little kid laundry, going to, Girl Scouts and baseball camps and all that. And he said, Tammy, being a sober mom to those kids is the greatest contribution you'll ever make. And I'd be like, yeah, easy for you to say. But my daughter was the keynote speaker of her graduation. And my kid gets up, and Patrick's on one chair behind me, and Rick's on another chair, and they're both filming Chelsea speaking. And my kid says, you know, the first 6 years of my life were really hard because my mom was an alcoholic. And I thought, oh, great. And I'm like going, no. I felt like 20,000 people were looking at me. And she said, and I want to let you know that when I was 6 years old, my mommy became sober. And she said, in my whole childhood, I remember my mommy changed, and my mommy took care of me, and she took care of my brother, and my mommy is my hero. And I'm graduating with honors today because of my mom. And I remember my ex-husband got down off the chair, and he put his arm around me, and he said, hey, Tammy. And I said, what? And he goes, there's that paycheck. In 2013, I got a call from my daughter. And by the way, that woman ended up leaving my husband, and she took him for almost every penny he had. Turns out, I know nobody ever believes this, you Al-Anons will, she was a worse alcoholic than I was. I know it's hard to believe, but she was, because she was vindictive and took all his money too. And I'm grateful to say that he's back in Al-Anon. And he learned that I have a compulsion to drink alcohol, and he has a compulsion for alcoholic women. Anyway, in 2013, I get a frantic call from my daughter at work that they're rushing my ex-husband to the hospital in critical condition. I had no idea what had happened. My ex-husband's a triathlete, a specimen of health, a health food nut, still a surgeon working 80 hours a week. So the only thing I could think of is, God, did he have a stroke or a heart attack? What's going on? I called Patrick. We rushed to our house, got the kids in the car. We drove the 3 miles to a 3-hour drive to where he was living in Northern California in a multi-specialty practice. And we get there, and the doctors pull me aside, and they said, we don't even give him 3 hours to live. He is on life support now. And they said, we've kept him alive because we heard that his children were coming, and we wanted them to have a right to say their goodbyes. I walked into the room, and I see my ex-husband hooked up to all these machines, breathing for him, and tubes and everything in his neck. And I literally, my knees went, and Patrick just held my arm. And then I, one by one, had to walk Chelsea and Alex in to say goodbye to their father. And the saddest was Chelsea. She said, Daddy, nobody was supposed to walk me down the aisle but you. And she said, Daddy, why did you have to leave me? And we went through that, and then they went out, and I just asked the doctors, because he was a doctor on staff, they allowed this. And I said, look, I just don't want him to die in this room alone. Could you just let me sit in the room with him until he goes? And they let me do that. And it turns out that my ex-husband, he was doing a surgery, and he started to have really severe back pain. And he had passed a kidney stone several years earlier, so he thought it was another stone. And he had 3 days off coming up, so he scrubbed out of the surgery and said, I'll just go home and lay down for 3 days. Well, it turned out that it wasn't kidney stones. Unfortunately, my ex-husband has the effects of Agent Orange from Vietnam, and he had full-blood septicemia. And he went home that night, and he passed out, and he laid in complete septic blood for 4 days, running through every organ of his body, unfortunately, including his brain. And when they called my daughter, and when she said my dad would never miss work, drive to where he lives, they found his car. We gave them permission to kick down the door, and they found him unconscious on the floor. And I sat in that room that night in my little hazmat suit, and Patrick was by my side. And Rick looked so familiar to me. And I thanked him for saving me in every way that a woman could be saved. And I thanked him for everything that he had done for me, because his only crime was he loved me. And I was such a damaged human being that I didn't understand that kind of love, and I had to destroy it. And I looked at that man, and I felt this love for Rick that night. And I told him to go ahead and go on home for an Emmy well-lived, because I knew that he would not want to be spoon-fed pudding and applesauce the rest of his life. And Patrick leaned over and whispered in his ear, and he said, Rick, I will never let any harm come to your children or to Tami, and you go on home to the good Lord and rest peacefully, brother. And we just stayed and held Rick's hand that night, and he was completely unconscious, and Rick didn't die that night. He didn't die the next day. 15 days later on life support, they were able to pull the life support, and he started to breathe on his own. 4.5 months later, in intensive care, 4.5 months, they called us and they told us that at Christmas time that they couldn't do anything more for him, that he was viable with life, but that he would never walk or talk again, and we needed to find a boarding care facility where he would spend the rest of his years until whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And at that point, I just wish God had taken him. And I start looking at these boarding care facilities, and here my beautiful surgeon ex-husband, who's published books, he's young, he's a triathlete, just a specimen of a beautiful man, and I've got to put him in this one room with these 3 little twin beds with all these other people in these comatose state. And I just went home and I called Clancy and I said, Clancy, I have this huge 5-bedroom house that he paid for all those years, and I'm putting him in this little room, and those old timers are smart. He goes, Tam, don't go there. He said, sweetheart, first of all, it's not fair to Patrick. And he said, and second of all, you could not provide the kind of care he needs. And I go, Clancy, what do you do when you feel like this? And he said, sweetheart, you just have to pray, and the answers will come if your own house is in order. But in the meantime, you find a boarding care as near to your house as possible, and you make sure he has the care he needs until whatever happens, happens. And I prayed on my way to work that day, and when I came home, my entire cul-de-sac was filled with Patrick's contractor trucks. And Patrick had laid all these hardwood special floors downstairs. He'd put pulleys, he'd redone the showers, and started all kinds of bars. We ordered a $6,000 used hospital bed with all these electronics. We were able to get full-time care. And to make a long story short, Rick walked my daughter Chelsea down the aisle last January, and he didn't use a walker and he didn't use a wheelchair, and he was able to do the father-daughter dance with her, and he gave a speech at her wedding. And that's what recovery looks like in Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. Rick is still with us to this day. He's got himself a little girlfriend. She's not an alcoholic, and he goes to Al-Anon, and he'll never be able to work again, and he was ready to move out. And I told him, you know, Rick, I kind of like to keep an eye on you. And he's like taking care of our dogs right now while we're traveling, and you know, he's got a whole wing downstairs, and it's worked for us. And I just want to, my last thing I'm going to share is, this is the first time this last couple of months that I've started speaking again. My beautiful son Alex was diagnosed with a horrible illness in December, and I'll tell you, I've been through some stuff in sobriety, but this one brought me to my knees. And when I stood in the boardroom of that hospital and they called my ex-husband and Patrick in and they told my son's diagnosis, I felt like cymbals crashing in my head. He's got a horrible diagnosis. There is no cure, and the prognosis is not good. I don't want to go into it because that's my son's story. But I'll tell you, my ex-husband and my current husband have been like bookends for me. And Rick, who's living with us, our ex-husband, was able to get my son to all kinds of his doctor's appointments and have tests run so I could stay and keep working. And you know what? I've had a really tough time with this one. This was a big one for me in sobriety. And so I took some time off of speaking because I wasn't able to share about it without crying. But like anything in recovery, all the men I was going to die over my first year of sobriety, that divorce that I was going to die over and I thought I wasn't going to survive. And the one good thing about having some time in sobriety is I have been here before where I feel like I'm going to die. But I do know that if I stay the course, the one thing that must remain stable, because nothing in life remains stable, but the one thing for an alcoholic that must remain stable is my sobriety. And I am finally at the point, and good old Clancy, with that loving Hallmark card that he has, he says, God damn it, Tami, this is happening to him, it's not happening to you. And quit sucking your thumb, quit being a professional mourner, and you be a sober mom to that kid, because God only knows he needs you now. And I am finally at the place where I'm going to be the best sober mom that any mom could be for a kid with my son's diagnosis, and we're going to walk this road with some kind of a dignity and grace. I thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. I thank Alcoholics Anonymous for God. Al-Anons, I salute you. Lindsay, you're adorable, and I am so proud of you. And Patrick, it's on tape now, dude, so you better be at this conference a year from now with a year of sobriety. Thanks for having me.